Mimi and the Unusual Engine. It was autumn on the island of Sodor, and the trains were being really useful and friendly. They were pulling freight cars and passengers of where they needed to go. Most freight trains pull hundreds of freight cars or more, and they use big AC-44 CW locomotives that are in the lead position. Sometimes they face forwards and sometimes they face backwards. Sometimes freight trains pull hundreds of freight cars as they pass stations with which they're full of natural items, and sometimes they can go faster or slower down steep grades. And one thing about the freight train is that the tank car is sometimes filled with crude oil, which is very slippery. And the sand car, also known as the buffer car, is loaded with sand in case oil leaks onto the tracks. And crude oil is very slippery. And that's why they use the crude oil freight car so the trains don't slip on the tracks. And the crude oil is loaded in all tank cars. Because the freight trains are so big, they use multiple engines together while they heave and haul goods up and down the lines. And because they're so big, they are really useful, just like Sir Topham Hatt's engines. One day, Mimi and Mercedes were shunting freight cars in the yard. They pulled up safely to a stop. "We don't want to crash into that high school again," Mercedes said. "Train tracks can be railroads or fail roads," they both said. Mercedes agreed to have a railroad. Sir Topham Hatt walked up. "While Henry's off island," Sir Topham Hatt said, "I'd like you, Mercedes, to pull the Flying Kipper." And with that, Mercedes steamed out of the yard to go to Brenton Docks to collect the Fish and Flying Kipper train. Then Sir Topham Hatt turned to Mimi. "Now, Mimi," Sir Topham Hatt said, "I'd like you to take a train of 76 cars to Vickerstown." "Yes, sir," Mimi said. "Claudia will meet you there with her train," he said. "Yes, sir," Mimi said. "Make sure to go nice and slowly," said Sir Topham Hatt. And Mimi steamed out of the yard to go collect her train. "Goods train coming through," she said. "Choo-choo is what we say." Over in the rail yard, Mimi told Percy and James all about the freight cars. "I must go slowly and carefully," said Mimi. "Exactly," said James. "You must." "I should," said Mimi. "Those troublesome trucks can misbehave," said Percy. But out of nowhere came an engine with a tender and another engine going backwards, which was a double twin coal tender engine that came out of nowhere, pulling lots and lots of cars. "Chugga chugga 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 choo choo! Woman engine coming through!" she said. "Diddly-dee-dee-dee-dee-da-da-da-da-da-da," sang the freight cars as they went over. And they clickety-clacked down the track, over the grade crossing, with all the Amtrak cars and Sodor cars. It was carrying lots and lots of goods. The Amtrak train was double-decker and single-decker because it had multiple Amfleet cars, Viewliner cars, and Heritage cars, and the auto-racks clickety-clacked. "Look back there," Mimi said. "What is it?" said James. "It's a goods train," said Percy. And it was, "Coming through!" both unusual engines said at the same time. James gasped. "Bust my buffers!" he said. "That's a choo-choo train? I've never seen a dual-cab steam engine before," Mimi said. "It's not usual." And the freight cars clattered along with all their items behind as the Viewliner cars and transition sleeper cars and other cars clattered along. "Whoopee!" cheered the freight cars and Amfleet passenger cars and others. It was a long train. And the freight cars clickety-clacked down the track of where they needed to go. It was a long train. And last in line was the brake van. "That was most unusual," said James. "I hope these troublesome trucks don't bump into each other," Percy said, "'cause those troublesome trucks will get them all the same." Mimi soon buffered up to Scruffy. "I won't get pulled apart like Oliver did to me," he said. And Mimi steamed out of the yard with all her freight cars following behind. And a van waited at the crossing gates for the train to go over, and it was really long. "Choo-choo deja vu," they sang, and then Mimi began to steam along, and the troublesome trucks began to sing their song about Percy and James. "They've been working on the railroad. They are red and green. They've been working on the railroad because